Have you ever considered making your own video game? My name is Jake O'Toole, and I'm going to show you how I made Mern's point-and-click adventure, a game made with common web technologies. To start off, I'd like to say that I am a junior developer, so the code you see here will be on the intermediate to beginner side. And also, I built this for fun, so it's definitely not going to be perfect, but it's going to be one way you could make a video game. So if you're unfamiliar what a point-and-click game is, here's a demo of what we're building towards. We're interacting with some sort of visual space, we're pointing, and we're clicking to interact with that space. And there's different things to interact with, like maybe an item that you could pick up. My overall strategy. So initially I was going to do React for the front end, Express and Node.js for the back end, and MongoDB Atlas for the database, or Mern. What I actually ended up doing was React for the front end, MongoDB Realm for the back end, and MongoDB Atlas as my database, which I'm calling it MER, or Mr. Squared. It's still a working title. So why did I pick Realm? Realm is a serverless backend, which means it's taking over all that Node.js and Express code I would have wrote and kind of simplifies a lot of it. So most of our code's on the front end. It's handling authentication of our users, data access restrictions, API query. It creates an API for us, schema validation, triggers and functions, and it's connecting us to MongoDB Atlas. So how I built it. So let's first start with our backend, Realm and Atlas. So when a user is created, Realm handles that and creates that and authenticates that user. At the same time, it creates an associated player doc in our players collection, which is stored in MongoDB Atlas. Each player document contains the location, inventory, and game progress, or what I'm going to call game state. It's a save of our user's data. So let's look at the player as more in a schema view. So location is going to be a string value, inventory is going to be an array of strings, and game progress is a property with an associated Boolean, so we're keeping track of whether or not that event happened. How do we connect our React app to our Realm app? So we import Realm, and we use our Realm ID to create an instance of a Realm app to use in our React app. So we log our user into our Realm app, and now we can get a reference to MongoDB Atlas from our Realm app, and we're going to call that MongoDB. This becomes very similar to how we would do it in a Node.js application. So we create a reference to our collection in our MongoDB database called players. And now we're going to do a query just like we would on the back end of Node.js. Players find one, and we're going to use our user ID to find the associated player document. Let's look at our React app component, our high-level component. So we're going to keep track of state using some hooks, and we're going to keep track of user and player. Now we can say, if there isn't a user yet, let's render our login. And that login component can set the player state and set the user state. If we do have a user, then let's render the game. And we can pass in the user state and the player state to use for rendering the game. So let's talk about an example of data locations. How do we render the correct location to the user? So let's say we have our game, we pass in our player, and we can have an object that has references to React components for each location in the game. And we can decide which one to render by using that object and picking the specific option in that object with the player data, specifically the location. And so we'd render the right location that way. But what if we want to change locations? So we're going to update our game state. Well, we're going to have some sort of on-click event probably, and we're going to query our collection of players. And we want to update one. This is very similar to MongoDB again, right, that we do in Node.js. So we update the specific document associated with our user, and we set the location to new location. Now we're going to update our player. But what's update player? So update player is a function we're going to use throughout. And I'm using this to, now that we've updated Atlas, we want to query it to find that new updated data. So we do players, find one, and we're finding our player document again. I'm going to call that updated player. And now we're going to update the state of our player in our React application with set player. And that should cause anywhere that needs to be re-rendered in our React application to happen. So let's look at a quick visualization to understand better what we just did. So we have our MongoDB database on the right. We have location set to outside. We update the MongoDB database to living room for our location, and now we're going to requery it, which re-rendered our app. We've updated the React state, which has caused the re-render showing the right location. So let's talk about inventory and game progress. So we have items which are stored in an array, and we have potential events that can happen, and we're using Booleans to keep track of whether or not those events happened. So how could we render this? Say we have our living room, we pass in our player object, or the state of the player. And we see, so they haven't yet picked up the key, so we'll render the key. And if they have picked up the key, this won't render, the key won't show up. And for our inventory, we can map through it since it's an array, and for each item in the inventory, we can render a button associated with each item in the inventory. And that's how we could show inventory. So what if we want to update those values though, right? It's going to be very similar to what we did before. We're going to query against our players collection. We're going to update one, right? And we're going to, instead, the only difference here is really we are pushing a new item into the inventory. This is not unique to this. This is how you would do it with normal MongoDB drivers. And the updating location is the same how we would update the game progress. So now we're setting picked key to true. And we'll update our player, which will cause our state in React to update, and we'll re-render. So let's take a look at the game kind of as a whole, or at least a proof of concept of how we could make this game. So we're outside in Mern's adventure. We're going to change locations. Turning on the light, I'm keeping track of that as a way to show off game progress. We can pick up the key, which is game progress updating and the inventory updating. You can see the inventory in the bottom right. We pick up the microscope. You can turn on another light. And we can go back. The light's still on. The keys still have been picked up because we're keeping track of that. And we picked up the note. So if our user was to log out and log back in, we'd query the database, and our state of our game would be identical to that database. We're always keeping the React app aligned with the database. So I think we can safely say that you can make a game with common web technologies. Those are pretty common React patterns that we used. And we did some simple MongoDB queries, but on the front end. We didn't have to worry about setting up API endpoints or authentication. So after the game, I definitely want to continue on it. I'd like to add animations, some puzzles for the user to solve, and maybe even get fancy with the storyline, which would make it, in my opinion, like a full game. Pros of making a game. It kept me motivated. It was fun to see the game actually happen, to see this action occur. It kept me learning more about Realm and React. And also, as a new developer, I don't have a whole lot of code that I could show to a potential employer. So this creates a pretty interesting talking point that I could show in a potential interview in the future. The illustrations were done by Sarah Bogosh, and you can see all of Sarah's awesome work on her Instagram at badponies.illustration, or you can find her Etsy shop at shop/badponies. Definitely recommend checking it out. If you want to follow me, I'm at JakeO'TooleDev in most places. If you want to find Mern's point-and-click adventure, a deployed version of it, and the associated repositories, you can go to jakeotoole.com. And go out and make your own game. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got to learn a thing or two. And thank you, MongoDB, for giving me this opportunity to speak at your event.